You were never supposed to hear this. Not from me, not from anyone. The records were burned. The headmaster died with the key, and the only remaining witness hasn't spoken a word since 1974. But if you're still watching after these next 8 seconds, you've already crossed the threshold. This isn't about ghosts. It's about something older. Something fed. Grayhaven School was built in 1893 as a haven for gifted children. That was the bait. The true purpose was never education. It was containment. The 5 students who vanished between 1959 and 1971 weren't runaways. They weren't forgotten. They were selected. Not because they were smart, but because they heard things. Beneath the school's chapel was a sublevel never listed on blueprints. A sealed stone chamber with copper wiring embedded in the walls. It wasn't for storage, it wasn't for prayer. It was called the observatory, but there was no telescope, no windows, just a locked door. And when the door was finally opened in 1982, after a renovation accident, the man who found it died 2 days later, crushed by scaffolding in what officials called a freak collapse. But those who know the truth call it something else. Repercussion. Inside that hidden chamber was a red leather ledger, 117 pages. Each page recorded not lessons but rituals. 5 names kept repeating. Children who were moved into the same dorm room, room 17B. Each one reported strange dreams. Each one began hearing whispers from the floor. Each one vanished. But before they disappeared, they were taught something, not arithmetic, not Latin, but tones. Frequencies. Hums beneath the lectures. Sounds too low for the conscious mind. They weren't being educated. They were being tuned. Prepared. The chapel above was no sanctuary. It was a resonant chamber, and its hymns weren't written for God. They were written to open something. One student, Ellis Thorne, left behind a journal. He said the chapel was hungry, that it remembered, that when children vanished, they didn't leave, they were taken, not by people, but by something inside the stone. And if you think this is just a story, lean in, because the last thing Ellis wrote before he disappeared was this: the 5th must remember. We still don't know what he meant, but we do know this 4 are gone, and 1 is still waiting. It was winter 1966 when Ellis Thorne arrived at Grayhaven. His parents were told their son had unusual sensitivities, not disorders, potentials. That was the language Grayhaven used, cloaked in academic flattery, weaponized to lower suspicion. The school took only a handful of students each year, all personally recruited. No public applications, no standardized tests. Ellis was 13. By his 2nd week, he was moved into dorm 17B, the same room every vanished child had lived in. And that's when the whispering began. He told his roommate, Jonas, that the floorboards spoke to him at night, not in words, not exactly in sounds, faint pulses like echoes underwater. The first few nights, Jonas thought he was imagining it too, but then they both started hearing it. Always at 3:17 a.m., always from beneath the bed. A sound like a throat clearing in reverse. They told the dorm master. He laughed, said it was the pipes. Then, on the 11th night, Jonas disappeared. No note, no warning, his bed perfectly made, his uniform neatly folded on the chair. Only one thing was out of place: his pillow, soaked entirely in salt water. Ellis wrote in his journal that he tried to leave that morning. He walked straight through the front gate. No one stopped him. No guards, no locks, just open air. But when he reached the bottom of the hill, Grayhaven was still in front of him, like he'd never left. He tried again. Same result, he was trapped. After that, things changed. The birds around campus stopped singing. Mirrors began fogging without heat. The other students wouldn't speak to him, not out of cruelty, but fear. They knew. A week later, Ellis received a sealed envelope under his door. No sender, no writing on the outside. Insider. A single photograph. 5 children standing outside the chapel, all in uniform, all smiling, but their faces had no eyes, just black smudges as if erased by ash. On the back of the photo, one sentence scrawled in pencil: only one hears the full chord. Ellis didn't sleep after that. He stopped eating. His handwriting changed, more angular, less human, and in one final entry dated March 3rd, 1967, he wrote, "They don't want silence, they want resonance, and I'm the 5th tone." He was never seen again. What no one talks about is what happened after Ellis vanished. Grayhaven claimed he ran away, just like the others. But his disappearance wasn't clean. There were signs. Marks on the floor beneath his bed, burns in the shape of concentric circles. The wood around them was blackened, but not from fire. It looked melted, like something radiated upward through the boards. The headmaster ordered the room sealed immediately. Room 17B was never reassigned. Students were told it had plumbing issues. But the staff never entered it again, not even to clean. That same year, 3 faculty members resigned without explanation. One of them, Ms. Lyra Mallory, the chapel's music instructor, reportedly went mad. She was found in her apartment 2 months after Ellis's disappearance. Alive, but incoherent. Her walls were covered in sheet music. But the notes weren't standard notation. They were impossible sequences, double staffs with overlapping frequencies, symbols that don't exist in any known musical system. When police asked her what the music was, she only said one word over and over: subharmony. She was institutionalized and died in 1984, still repeating that word, subharmony, a sound beneath sound, a tone you can't hear unless something inside you has already been shifted. 2 years later, in 1969, a team from the diocese arrived quietly at Grayhaven. Not clergy, technicians. They brought meters, recording equipment. One student, now an adult, recalled seeing copper rods pressed into the chapel's stone floor. He also remembered the team placing a young girl, blindfolded, at the pulpit. They asked her to hum. No one ever saw that girl again, but a week after the visit, all chapel services were temporarily suspended. Mass was replaced with silent reflection. The bells stopped ringing, and in the rare moments they did ring, by accident or storm, multiple students fainted. One had a seizure. Every incident happened within seconds of a specific bell, the smallest one. Not the call to worship, not the hour, one that atoned between octaves, one that lingered longer than metal should, almost wet. To this day, that bell is missing from every official inventory. It was never installed by any known craftsman, and it bore no inscription. Just a symbol, a triangle inside a circle, surrounded by 5 dots, 5 vanished children, 5 tones, and a sound we were never supposed to hear. In early spring of 1970, a former student named Caleb Wren returned to Grayhaven uninvited. He was 29 years old by then, with no known profession, no surviving family, and, according to official records, had died in 1963, a clerical error they claimed later. But Caleb's presence at the school that night wasn't a mistake. He broke into the grounds through the western greenhouse, moved directly to the old archives beneath the main office, and retrieved a single object, a reel-to-reel audio tape labeled simply Bell Room 3:17 a.m. Security apprehended him as he attempted to flee, but Caleb offered no resistance. He kept repeating one phrase: "You've already rung it. You just haven't heard it yet." Local police were called. The school demanded his silence, and within 48 hours, Caleb Wren was dead, hung in his cell with no signs of struggle. The tape was never entered into evidence. But there's more. A custodian named Edgar Holt claimed to have listened to the recording before authorities arrived. He didn't say much, just that it wasn't music. It wasn't even sound. He said it was like hearing your own blood remember something, like something ancient and beneath language. 2 weeks after making this claim, Holt was institutionalized. He had attempted to remove both of his eardrums with a pencil. Whatever was on that tape, whatever Caleb was trying to take or destroy, it wasn't man-made, and it wasn't isolated. In the basement of the chapel, behind the sealed door no student was ever supposed to see. Renovations revealed something else in the plaster and engraving, a pattern of interlocking spirals and pentagrams etched by hand into the stone. But they weren't decorative. They were notations, musical ones, and each spiral ended in the same symbol Caleb had scrawled on his own arm before he died, 5 dots surrounding a triangle. One former faculty member finally spoke in 1981, long after retiring. In a taped interview, she whispered, "They thought they were praising God, but the notes were reversed. The children weren't singing to anything. They were letting something in." And then she stopped speaking entirely. Her last written words were later found scribbled in the margins of a hymnal. "The fifth doesn't vanish. The fifth awakens." There is a word that keeps surfacing in every document, every whisper, every ruined page connected to Grayhaven, a word that appears in margins, in journal entries, in the grooves of the chapel walls scratched beneath layers of paint: Silito. It isn't Latin. It doesn't exist in any modern language, but it feels old, like it predates speech. Every child who vanished was reported to have said it at least once, sometimes in their sleep, sometimes while staring into corners. Ellis Thorne wrote it 17 times on the last page of his journal, always in the same formation, a spiral, We believe now that Silito wasn't a name, it was a note, a summons. The 1971 inspection of Grayhaven's foundation was prompted by growing reports of structural instability, floors that bowed without pressure, cold spots that moved across hallways, and stone that wept water during clear weather. What they found beneath the chapel confirmed every fear. Directly under the pulpit, 4 feet of concrete separated the known foundation from an unmarked cavern. The inspectors drilled into it. What came out wasn't air, but a pressurized sound. A tone too deep for most of them to hear, felt only in the sternum, like grief or dread. 2 inspectors immediately vomited. 1 began sobbing. The 4th lost consciousness entirely. They were told it was a gas leak. Within a week, the diocese ordered the chamber resealed. No report was filed. And that same day, Grayhaven's final student, the 6th, disappeared. Her name was Anomalous Bray. She had no prior history of psychological issues, no disciplinary infractions. But in the months before her vanishing, she began to draw obsessively, pages and pages of spirals, circles, and rows of teeth. She stopped speaking to her classmates, would only respond to one question, "What is Silito?" And her answer was always the same. "It's what's under the stone. It's what the 5th hears when the others sleep." Anomalous disappeared on the night of the spring equinox during a storm that knocked out power for 7 minutes. When it came back, she was gone. The locks were still sealed, the windows unbroken, her bed undisturbed. Only one thing remained, a humming, caught faintly on backup security tape, a layered sound with 5 overlapping frequencies, one of which had never been recorded on Earth before. The resonance had returned, and the 5th was no longer just listening. After the 6th disappearance, Grayhaven quietly shut its doors. The public explanation was financial mismanagement, but there was no debt, no lawsuits, no budget collapse. In fact, the school's endowment had mysteriously doubled in the final 2 years. What they were really covering up was what happened the week after Anomalous vanished. A team of state officials arrived to catalog the property for closure. They entered the chapel first, and according to an internal memo, now declassified, one of the surveyors, Derek Malone, lost his voice permanently within 3 minutes of stepping onto the altar. Not from injury. His vocal cords were intact, but he could no longer produce sound. Not even a whisper, just silence. What's more chilling is what his handheld recorder captured in those minutes. It wasn't silence, it was a pulse, a low, rhythmic beat, like a second heartbeat buried under stone. Analysts enhanced it years later and discovered something that still defies explanation, a voice buried in the sound. Faint but deliberate, whispering in a language no linguist could decode. The waveform showed 5 distinct tones, layered imperfectly, just enough to cause dissonance in human ears. They called it the 5th chord. It isn't music, it's disruption. That same day, all 6 of the vanished students' belongings were removed from storage and incinerated. No items were returned to families. No photos were archived. Just one item remained, Anomalous Bray's last drawing, a page soaked in something that tested negative for all known pigments. Not ink, not charcoal. It depicted 5 children standing around a hole. In the center, a dark spiral descending deep, deeper than any architecture on campus allowed, and above the spiral, something emerging, thin, long, faceless. Written beneath it in Anomalus's tiny, perfect print, "We are the echo. It is the voice." After that, the building was sealed. Grayhaven was never reopened, never repurposed, never even sold. A private trust maintains the grounds, keeps it untouched. Surveillance is still active, though no one has been seen on site in decades. But satellite imaging caught something strange in 1996. Thermal signatures in the exact shape of the chapel's bell tower, lit from within. The bell was never removed, and according to the data it rang once, at exactly 3:17 a.m. on the spring equinox. Just like before, just like always, there's a rumor whispered by those who once worked at Grayhaven, janitors, night staff, nurses who lasted less than a month. Most won't speak on record. But the story always comes back the same. There was a room that didn't exist on any blueprint, a door that appeared only at night, only to some. They called it Room 0, according to former groundskeeper Tobias Eames, who died in 1998 under suspicious circumstances. Room 0 wasn't accessible by corridor or stair. You didn't find it, it found you. Tobias claimed it appeared once to him in 1966, while walking past the East Wing's 2nd floor, a blank door, no knob, no markings, just a pressure. Like gravity shifting in the wrong direction. He ran, but others weren't as lucky. A 1972 diary entry by an unnamed student, recovered during demolition prep, describes hearing whispers behind the walls, leading her to what she thought was a broom closet. Inside was nothing, just a stone floor, no shelves, no supplies, and in the middle, etched in dust, 5 must hear, 1 must call. The girl disappeared 3 days later. What's worse, when construction crews entered the East Wing in 1995 for structural assessment, they found a wall section with 5 sets of initials scratched low to the ground, like by children. Beneath them, one phrase repeated in a child's shaky hand: "Room 0 opens when the 5th listens." That room, the one no one could locate in the day, the one with no records, was not empty. Deep Scan Ludar, performed secretly in 2013 by urban explorers using illegal equipment, revealed a chamber behind the East Wing, perfectly square, 10 by 10 feet, entirely sealed in concrete, except for one small detail: a metal rung embedded into the floor at its center, like the start of a ladder, leading down. No one has broken into it yet. But the explorers reported something else. Their equipment, while scanning, began to vibrate, not mechanically, but tonally. One microphone picked up a frequency that pulsed exactly every 17 seconds. They called it a glitch, but an audio engineer later noted something terrifying. It wasn't random. It was breath, steady, rhythmic, waiting. Room 0 isn't a myth. It's a mouth, and it's still listening. In 1984, a sound technician named Vernon Ray, who once serviced Grayhaven's chapel acoustics in the 60s, sent a letter to his estranged daughter. He was dying of bone cancer. In the final paragraph, he wrote, "There was something wrong with the air in that place, not in how it felt, in how it listened back. I never believed in God, but that building heard me. It knew my name." She never responded. 2 days later, Vern slit his wrists in a motel bathtub. The letter was never mailed. It was found stuck inside an old hymnal donated anonymously to a church in Albany. That same hymnal had something else tucked inside, folded between pages 115 and Hellersen seeks a photograph. Black and white, grainy, it showed the Grayhaven chapel interior empty, but along the back pews 5 faint shapes could be seen, partially transparent, like impressions burned into film. The original photographer is unknown, but written on the back, in red ink, they were never gone. You just stopped seeing them. This wasn't the only photograph to surface. In 1990, a former student, Mara Wilkes, shared a yearbook photo of her 1968 class. 27 girls, 1 boy. But beneath the image, 6 names were missing, not erased, absent, like they'd never existed. Their bodies were there, their faces blurred, but the caption simply skipped their names. Mara claimed the class had 34 students, not 28. She remembered all of them, especially the 6 who used to hum to themselves during storms, the ones who always sat closest to the chapel wall, the ones who, after a certain night in March, were never mentioned again. When asked why she held onto the photo all these years, Mara simply said, "Proof that they were here, and that they were taken, not forgotten." She died less than a month later, found drowned in her own bathtub. No water damage, no forced entry, just one strange thing: an old school bell clapper placed gently beside her head on the tile floor. The same shape, the same oxidized weight used in the Grayhaven bell tower. A bell that no longer exists, at least not in this world. And yet it keeps ringing, in dreams, in machines, in memories that don't belong to us. The 6 are not silent. There's a pattern embedded in the timeline of the Grayhaven disappearances, one that wasn't noticed until a former FBI analyst, Clay Moran, reviewed the sealed diocese records in 2003. He wasn't looking for paranormal phenomena. He was investigating patterns of institutional cover-up. But what he found shook even him. Every child who vanished at Grayhaven did so on the equinox or the solstice, 4 dates per year, spaced precisely 91 days apart. The vanishings occurred not at random, but on ancient calendar markers used in pre-Christian rituals tied to opening and descent. Moran's chilling conclusion: Grayhaven wasn't a school. It was a schedule. Even more disturbing was a hidden file Moran unearthed, stored in microfiche misfiled under maintenance logs 1959. It contained a series of internal memos between a man referred to only as A. Desmond and a bishop in upstate New York. The memos repeatedly reference convergence intervals and the resonance chamber. But one line is circled in red and repeated in several letters. If the 5th can be made to listen, the 6th will open the mouth. The 7th will become the door. 7, that number returns over and over. 7 tones, 7 rungs, 7 breaths, but only 6 students officially vanished. So who or what was the 7th? In the back of the file was a typewritten note with no heading, no signature. It reads, "The seventh was not a student. It was the space between them, the silence they made together, the void given shape. It waits, and when it is heard, it will be remembered into flesh." Grayhaven didn't just house something ancient, it was constructing it, sound by sound, child by child, absence by absence. Moran turned in his findings. Within 2 weeks he was dismissed, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and institutionalized, but not before mailing his personal research copy to an independent archivist. The pages were blank, all but one. At the very end of the binder in handwritten inky, "The door is a note. The child is the key. The sound is not heard. It is obeyed." Grayhaven was never about teaching children. Most people think Grayhaven's final disappearance, Anomalous Bray, was the end of it, that the school shut down and the horror was sealed away with rusted gates and silence. But the truth is far worse. Anomalous never left Grayhaven because she was never supposed to. She was the completion, the sixth tone in a forgotten chord, and after she vanished, something strange began to happen in towns nearby. 3 days after her disappearance, in the small village of Hollow Pike, just 12 miles from Grayhaven, every dog in the town barked at once, for 13 minutes straight. Then silence. Complete. Not even the birds resumed. Wildlife watchers logged it as an environmental anomaly. But the locals reported something else, children humming. But none of them were awake. The next week, 2 children at a rural daycare began drawing spiral symbols with black crayon, despite no crayons being provided that day. The drawings matched one found in Anomalus's locker, thought destroyed in the incineration. One of the children claimed she had heard a girl singing from the ground. When asked what the girl sang, she replied in a voice not her own, "We are the first breath, not the last." Then she collapsed. Doctors found nothing wrong, but that night her parents claimed she sat bolt upright in bed at exactly 3:17 a.m. and said, "The mouth has opened." The next child is chosen. She was gone the next morning, her bed untouched, windows sealed, no footprints, no evidence, nothing, just the faint smell of rust, and a bell sound caught faintly on the home's baby monitor. A bell with no physical source. Grayhaven didn't stop with Anomalous. That was just the last public event. The actual purpose of the school was never confined to the building. It was a resonator, a stone instrument meant to prime a particular frequency, using children as conductors. The 6th tone wasn't the final note. It was the activation. And the 7th, it's not a person, it's an idea. A virus of sound moving through memory, story, dream. And once enough people have heard it, even briefly, it becomes unavoidable. So if you're hearing something lately at night, when everything else is silent, don't answer. Because it isn't calling you. In 1975, a man named Calvin Dorr broke into Grayhaven under cover of night. He wasn't a thrill seeker or paranormal investigator. He was a former theology professor who had lost his only daughter at the academy in 1969. Her name was Eliza Dorr, one of the 6 officially listed as absconded. But Calvin never accepted that word. Not after the closed casket funeral with no remains. Not after the diocese refused to release even her final test scores. And definitely not after he received a cassette tape in the mail, wrapped in linen and marked simply, "Play only after sunset. Do not interrupt." The tape was 6 minutes, 23 seconds long. The sound, a slow, layered hum, like multiple children humming different pitches at once. But something was wrong. There were too many tones, at least 15, some rising, others falling, but all timed in a mathematically impossible cycle that never fully repeated. Calvin's nose began to bleed at minute 20:14. By 3:50, he said he felt something behind him. By 4:10, he could no longer move. He described it later in his field notes. "My skin was vibrating, not in pain, in recognition, like a key fitting into flesh." The sound wasn't from a machine or a child. It was older. I think it knew I was Eliza's father, and I think it wanted to finish what she began. That night, Calvin entered Grayhaven with nothing but a lantern, a recorder, and the tape. He never came out. 2 weeks later, his tape recorder was found on the steps of a church in Ohio. The tape inside was blank. The recorder was melted shut. Inside the battery compartment, a scrap of fabric was fused into the metal, child-sized, marked with the Grayhaven emblems, an open book and a bell. But the bell's clapper was missing. Since that night, several others have claimed to hear faint audio glitches in surviving Grayhaven surveillance footage, ghost tones beneath the static. One pattern loops exactly every 6 minutes and 23 seconds. Same length as Calvin's tape. Only now, something has changed. Because if you slow that tone by 40%, filter out the high frequencies and reverse the waveform, what you hear is unmistakable. She was never in the coffin. The tape wasn't a message. In 1987, a former nun named Sister Adrienne Meeks walked into a psychiatric hospital in Rhode Island and confessed to something no one understood. She'd been missing for 19 years. Her last known location, Grayhaven School, listed on records as its liturgical archivist. Her name had appeared nowhere else since 1968. But when she arrived at the hospital barefoot, clutching a bundle of cloth and ash, she spoke only 7 words before collapsing. The silence is written. It remembers us. When she regained consciousness 3 days later, she began drawing, pages upon pages of tight, intricate symbols. Not scripture, not Latin, notation. Music, but not the kind meant to be played. It was meant to be reconstructed, in mind. When analyzed, the sheets formed a pattern of tones that mapped perfectly onto the architectural layout of Grayhaven's East Wing. The notes aligned with stairwells, thresholds, even radiators, like the building itself had been composed, not built. A sacred structure, tuned to produce resonance under very specific conditions, child voices, specific ages, harmonized across time. She said one final thing before she died of sudden cardiac arrest that night. They didn't teach us hymns. They taught us how to unlock the room below the soul. Her body was cremated, but her ashes were never returned to the convent. They vanished in transport, and 3 weeks later, a janitor at the now abandoned Grayhaven grounds found something unusual in the collapsed chapel. The ashes, arranged in a spiral on the stone floor. At the center, a single brass bell clapper, same make, same weight, same oxidation as the ones used in the old tower. How did the ashes get there? Who placed them? No one has ever explained it. But witnesses at the scene described an overwhelming pressure in the room, like the air was being compressed into shape. Several reported a faint droning in their ears for days afterward. Tinnitus tests showed nothing, but in one audio recording captured by a journalist inside the chapel, the hum is clear, steady, harmonic, and layered, and at exactly 2:37 into the recording, a voice emerges, childlike, calm, clear. 6 gone, 1 sealed, 1 remains. Grayhaven didn't close. It changed form. In 1992, an acoustic physicist named Dr. Malcolm Ireton published a paper that was immediately pulled from every academic journal within 48 hours. The paper had a simple title, Nonlinear Harmonics in Pre-Linguistic Structures, the Grayhaven Resonance. He claimed that after investigating the stone composition and internal geometry of abandoned religious structures in the Northeast, particularly Grayhaven, he'd found a consistent anomaly. Certain spaces echoed sound at intervals that did not align with physical acoustics. In his own words, these buildings shouldn't echo the way they do. Some of them reflect sound that hasn't even been made yet. One chapel produced a tone before I spoke, as if it was anticipating. Dr. Ireton took this further. He proposed that Grayhaven had been built not for housing students, but for capturing voice, not recording it, retaining it. A vault not for sound, but for meaning stripped of words. He designed an experiment using deep spectrum microphones placed around the ruins. After days of silence, he captured an 11-second audio fragment on a windless night. At first, just static. Then a pattern emerged, a pulse of 7 tones, low and vibrating. But what followed was the truly disturbing part, a child's voice, singing backwards. When reversed and cleaned, the lyrics were, "We are beneath. We are the breath between. When you sleep, we count you." Dr. Ireton submitted the tape with his manuscript, but when journal editors attempted to play it, the machines failed. Several computers crashed. One editor experienced a seizure. When they recovered, they reportedly muttered, "The walls are listening through me." Within 2 days, Dr. Ireton disappeared. His home was found undisturbed. The only clue, a crude drawing carved into his office wall with a tuning fork, a spiral of 7 concentric rings, with a stick figure at the center, mouth agape. Where his paper should have been archived, there's now only a blank entry marked, "Retracted by author, reason unknown." But one assistant, who kept a photocopy, claims the final paragraph read, "Sound is not an effect of space. At Grayhaven, space was an effect of sound, and once you speak its name, you are inside it." Grayhaven was never made of brick and stone. It was made of memory, and memory, once tuned, never stays buried. In 1996, a small local radio station in upstate New York, WRV 103.7, broadcast an unusual late-night segment. It aired only once, unannounced, between 2:00 and 20:30 a.m. On a Tuesday. The station's manager claimed it was a technical error, dead air mistakenly sent out. But over a dozen callers phoned in during the transmission, not to complain, but to ask, "Who's singing?" The audio wasn't listed in the station's archives. But one man, a night shift trucker named Dennis Mallory, recorded the broadcast onto a cassette out of habit. What he captured has since become part of a whispered legend among forbidden audio researchers. The first 12 minutes are nearly silent. Then, beneath the hiss, something begins, a slow, low rhythm, like breathing, rhythmic, precise. Gradually, a melody rises, childlike, fragile, sung in a tongue no one could identify. Experts ruled out Latin, Aramaic, Greek, or phonetic glossolalia. Then, just as the song reached what might have been a chorus, static, white out, violent, distorted, and then a single, perfectly clear voice whispered. The bell tolls inside the skull. Mallory brought the tape to his church the next day. His pastor listened to it once, then refused to allow it on the property. Said it wasn't demonic, it was older. Said it wasn't meant to be heard, only leaked. A resonance of original disobedience. The next week, Mallory suffered a stroke while sleeping in his truck, parked just outside Grayhaven's ruins. But here's what was strange: the stroke didn't kill him. It paralyzed his ability to speak, and nothing else. And for 5 days straight, he tried to hum, over and over, the same 7 tones. When someone finally hummed it back to him, just once, he died instantly, smile on his face, no signs of trauma, except one inside his mouth, beneath the tongue, was a small object, a child's tooth, not his own. Mallory never attended Grayhaven, but something from that transmission had found him, and if it found him, it can find anyone, because Grayhaven's choir never needed a building, just a listener. In 2001, the Vatican released a quiet revision to its internal index of local prohibit, sites deemed spiritually hazardous and permanently inaccessible to clergy without special authorization. Among the additions was a strange Latin phrase, rarely seen before, Dumus Silenite vox infinium non redilt. The house of silence, the voice of the children shall not return. No coordinates were listed, no explanation provided. But several months later, a former Vatican archivist leaked a page from a black-bound manual labeled Vocalic Structures, Anomalous Sites, Eastern U.S. On it, a hand-drawn floor plan nearly identical to Grayhaven's old blueprints, but with one critical difference: a sub-basement never officially recorded. Labeled only Resonantia 6, it had no stair access, no vents, no visible entrance. But the notes beside it were chilling. 6 known entries, 7 known unsealed, voces rotata, harmonia ad ossa, so rotated voices, harmony down to the bone. A digital copy of the floor plan was traced to a now defunct Catholic university in Maryland. When investigators visited, they found that room 307, where the file had been accessed, had its walls completely covered in melted cassette tape. Floor to ceiling, a single phrase had been scratched into the plastic with a broken crucifix. I heard her humming inside me, and no further documentation has surfaced. But whispers began in underground theology forums. Some claimed that Grayhaven wasn't the first such site, only the loudest. Others pointed to similar phenomena. Children's choirs gone missing in Brazil, an abandoned boarding school in Belgium where walls still emit faint lullabies, an island orphanage off the coast of Maine with no surviving audio records, despite being wired with 24-hour surveillance. Each of these places shared one element: a circular room beneath the earth. 7 sconces, 1 bell, no shadows. Grayhaven's silence wasn't empty. It was sealed, and seals, by nature, are meant to break, and when they do, what returns isn't evil. It's unfinished, something that never learned to die, because it never finished being heard. And now the question is no longer where Grayhaven is, it's what if it's already started again?